Good evening and welcome to our Referendum 92 special. New Zealanders nationwide have been taking part in an historic decision today, voting on whether or not we should change the way we elect our politicians. Already it's becoming clear that the mood of the country is for change. Over the next half hour we'll bring you full coverage of that decision so far, as well as reaction from the politicians and people around the country. Our political correspondent Richard Hammond is standing by at tonight's Referendum Results Centre, the Chief Electoral Office in Lower Hutt. And with me here in Auckland, Nigel Roberts, political scientist and advisor to the Electoral Referendum Panel. We'll be crossing to the Results Centre in just a moment, but first a quick reminder of just what we were voting about. In Part A, voters decided if they wanted to retain the present first-past-the-post voting system or change to a new system. In Part B, voters had the option of choosing one of four types of electoral reform: the supplementary member system, the single transferable vote system, the mixed member proportional system, or the preferential voting system. So, for the latest on how that vote went today, let's go straight to tonight's Referendum Results Centre and our political correspondent, Richard Hammond.
Well, here at the Chief Electoral Office in Lower Hutt, they've counted votes from 30% of the polling places so far, and at those polling places, 9.8%, nearly 10% of all the people on the roll have cast their votes, and those are the votes that have been counted. So at this stage, this is how it's looking. Only 16.3% want to retain the present system, but a massive 83.7% want to change. But of course there was more to this referendum than just whether or not people wanted a change. People were also asked what sort of change they wanted. And 5.8% want the supplementary member system, 16.9% the single transferable vote, and a massive 70.3% for mixed member proportional system. That's been called MMP in the campaign leading up to this referendum, and 7% for preferential voting like they have in Australia. Now with me here in Lower Hutt is the Chief Electoral Officer, Helen Clark. Brian, a big question, what sort of turnout do you think we're going to see in this referendum?
I believe we could be seeing a turnout similar to the 1967 referendum. At the present time, the figures are of votes counted rather than total turnout, because we haven't included special votes which are counted in the final result.
Now, what was that turnout in the last referendum?
69%.
So, how does that compare with the general election?
It's down on a general election. The 1990 general election had a turnout in the 80s and the high 80s.
But still fairly high?
Oh, yes.
Brian Clark, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, to recap those results, there's a massive majority for change. 83.7% of the people whose votes have been counted so far want change, and the change that they want is undoubtedly MMP. 70.3% favouring MMP at this stage. Lindsay.
Nigel Roberts, sounds as though we may as well go home.
Well, it's a bit like the 1975 or 1990 elections, isn't it? It's all over bar the final counting. The results themselves are not surprising. I was saying back in April privately, and of course I couldn't say it publicly, that my prediction was this time, 1992, a vote for change, and MMP, the clear winner on Part B of the voting paper. What is surprising is the size of those votes on both parts of the voting paper at this stage. They may be modified. We've still got a lot of results to come in, particularly from rural areas, and I think that we're going to see more Conservative votes from rural seats, Nationals heartland, from the Maori electorates and seats like that. But nevertheless, the size of the vote for change and the size of the majority, because there are more than half the votes for MMP, is quite staggering.
Why do you suppose MMP proved to be so popular of the four options?
Well, it was in the field, in effect, 5.5 years longer than any of the other horses. It had been cantering around the track in preparation for the referendum ever since the Royal Commission released its report at the end of 1986. In effect, the others only got into the field, and particularly into the public field, in late June, early July this year. And it had a head start.
A little unfair to the others then, isn't it?
Well, I think that's where the cookie crumbles. I mean, the government, Parliament structured the referendum, giving a smorgasbord of choices. It's a unique referendum. It has been an amazing referendum in that respect. But I think it was always going to be a hard row for the others to catch up. I think the staggering thing, looking at the minor placings, is how well STV has done in something of a late surge. A lot of people expected it, because of sheer complexity, to come fourth. It's a clear second at the moment. but second in this race isn't good enough. It's a first-past-the-post race on Part B.
Absolutely. Well, Nigel, for the moment, thanks. We'll come back with more results and further comment from new Labour leader Jim Anderton after this. Back shortly.
One more box should do it, love. Is this yours, this gun?
No, not that, Mum. That was here when we moved in.
I don't know. Your own house at your age.
That lamp is ours, Mum. That goes.
Your father and I didn't get our own home till we had the two of you. It was different then.
Books go too, thanks.
Of course, we weren't both out working. Women worked at home in those days.
Well, we share it now. Martin's actually a big help around the house. Speaking of Martin, where is he?
It's not that we didn't want our own home sooner. It's not that we didn't try. In fact, we went and saw the bank. You know what they said back then, don't you?
No, what'd they say?
Remember it like it was yesterday. They said, if you didn't so obviously need this mortgage so very badly, we might find it a little easier to give you one. Why don't you come back when you don't need it quite so badly?
The cheek of them.
Well, it was a long time ago. Oh, sorry. Sorry, love.
If you'd like to save money on toll calls, keep an eye on your letterbox, because a very special messenger is about to deliver you a very special message.
Invest in precious metal. For more information, phone personalised plates on 0800 65 55 65.
Begin 1, you are clear to climb out. Maintain heading 240, over. Roger, tower. We have your visual, Vision 1. Change frequency to 291.7, over. Understood. Cutting in post, tower. All controls to manual. 4 seconds to intercept. Roger, tower.
One of the world's leading aircraft manufacturers makes cars. Sierra, Alpha, Alpha, Bravo. For more information, see your nearest Saab dealer or phone this number.
Midnight, one more night without sleeping. Green world, what's that secret you're keeping?
Monday, good news for porkers, bad news for growers.
We're broke. The industry is broke. That's all there is to it.
The kiwi fruit industry in crisis.
I blame the marketing board.
Livelihoods on the line. Homes, Monday, 6:30 on 1.
Welcome back to Referendum 92. The decision thus far, an overwhelming majority opting for change and for MMP as the preferred form of change. And back to the results centre in Lower Hutt, here's Richard Hammond.
Where votes from 43% of polling places have now been counted, 17.1% of people on the roll have had their votes counted, and there's really no change in the overall situation. 15.5% of the votes counted opting to retain the present system, massive 84.5% wanting change. And when we look at the various options, well, it's the same old story there too. 5.6% for the supplementary member system, 17.4% for the single transferable vote, and well in front, 70.4% for mixed member proportional MMP, and 6.6% for preferential voting. So a clear majority here for MMP. Lindsay.
Well, joining me now from Christchurch, a politician whose party could stand to benefit strongly from a move towards proportional representation, Alliance spokesman Jim Anderton. A fairly gratifying result for you tonight, Mr Anderton.
Yes, Lindsay, and gratifying for New Zealand and all those who've fought for proportional representation a lot longer than I have, I must admit. But a victory for common sense and for democracy, and a warning to the two major parties in this country not to play around with this. 90% of New Zealanders have said they want proportional representation. It's up to Parliament now, that's the government and the opposition and the Alliance MPs, to deliver a sensible mixed member proportional system at the next referendum, not one that the government wants to gerrymander and make as bad as possible, but one which the New Zealand voters can live with and that we can put up against the present system on an equal basis for 1993. If they don't do that, then the people will use the first past the post system to punish both of them, and I believe that's the message tonight.
2/3, though, of the voters on the eve of the poll said they were too confused to make an informed decision. That rather takes the gloss off it, doesn't it?
No, what it means is that the way that the referendum was run from the beginning was abysmally bad, and it was not what the Royal Commission suggested. It suggested MMP against the present system. The people have supported that and have said that's what we want in 1993, and it's up to the Parliament to produce that result for the people. And if they don't do it, and they don't do it seriously and constructively, then both those major parties are going to be in big trouble in 1993, because don't forget that the first past the post system is a winner-take-all situation. It's not fair, and the Alliance, having said that it would introduce an MMP system if elected, could well be elected as government on that alone if the two major parties don't take this vote very seriously indeed.
But your biggest hurdle is yet to come. That is the binding referendum next year.
Well,
maybe a different story then.
That's what I'm saying. That Mr. Bolger, prior to this referendum, tried to mess it up, in my view, threatening the Maori people, predicting that we'd have to increase the size of Parliament, when in fact the present system was recommended for increase by the Royal Commission as well, and he never said that. So he's going to have to stop playing games, and Parliament is going to have to get down to devise the best form of MMP, not the worst, the best form of MMP for this country, and put that up against the present system, and then we'll see in 1993 how people vote on that. But if they don't do that, people will use the first past the post system to get rid of both of them, because it can do that in a three-way contest very easily indeed.
Jim Anderton, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And with me here in Auckland, one of the leading lights in the campaign to retain our first past the post electoral system, Labour's Deputy Leader, Helen Clark. And you've rather decisively lost round one tonight by the look of it.
Well, you don't take any position in politics unless you are able to lose gracefully. And certainly the people have spoken tonight very strongly. I think they've spoken about far more than the voting system. I think people are really showing a great distaste for the way the country is, the way governments have behaved and all the rest of it, but they've shown that strongly.
And that's an indictment of politicians, or the current crop of politicians, yourself included, really, isn't it?
Well, I think it's really related to the fact that people feel the country's been sliding backwards for the last 20 years, and finally they've had a chance in a kind of by-election atmosphere to say that, and that's what's happened.
And apparently quite a high turnout too, contrary to all expectation.
Well, perhaps higher than we thought, although not as high, obviously, as a general election result would have brought out.
Accepting the need for change, or at least the desire for change, which has been expressed very strongly, is MMP the form of change that you're most comfortable with, or would have you preferred another one?
Oh, it's the form of change that I'm least comfortable with. But can I say we have discussed the issue of tonight's scenario in the Labour caucus, and our view, regardless of where we stood on the options, was that the opposition would work constructively to see that proper proposal was put before the public at a binding referendum last year, and that's the commitment we make as a responsible opposition.
Are you going to pull out all the stops to head off MMP at the next election?
Frankly, I can't see myself supporting it, because my position has been a principled one. I don't really like politicians who rush to the front of a crowd when they see it and say, yes, I'll take the leadership. I have solid reasons for supporting the present system, but nonetheless I think Parliament now has the responsibility of putting a viable proposal up to the public next year, and at least we'll know what we're voting on then, which was really not the case this time. People had no clear idea what the details of MMP or any other system were going to be.
But a clear preference obviously for MMP.
A clear preference for change, but I think people are talking about change that goes far beyond electoral systems. They're really expressing a concern about the way the country is.
Helen Clark, thank you very much for joining us. After the break, we'll talk to the Prime Minister, get his reaction to tonight's results. Back shortly.
Last month, a call to Crime Watch solved a murder. This Tuesday, police need your help to catch the man who attacked a young boy before he strikes again. Find the bogus security guard who stole in broad daylight. Break an opiate drug cycle that links addiction to crime. And Crime Watch heads up country, but they're not just horsing around. Don't let crime statistics get you down. Do something about it. Crime Watch in association with State Insurance, Tuesday 8:30 on 1.
It happened for me as the sunset on a place that they call Kakadu. It happened for me in the North Territory. It happened for others there too. It happened for me out at Ayers Rock, just like it's happened for millions of years. It happened for me in that vast red country, this mysterious dream time of theirs.
It'll happen for you if you come here, 'cause Australia just happens to be the most happening place. Can you handle the pace? Oh, it's where it all happens to happen to happen. It's where it all happens to be.
You must have been a beautiful baby. You must have been a beautiful child. Well, I can see the judge's eyes as he handed you the prize. I bet you made the cutest bow. You must have been a beautiful baby. 'Cause baby, just look at you now.
It's bonus trade-in month at Noel Leemings. Your old stereo could be worth $300, $400, $500 when you trade up at Noel Leemings. Get an amazing $250 when you trade up to this new Panasonic. Trade your oven, trade your microwave, trade your auto washer, vacuum, video. Get big, big dollars for your trade, plus 1.5 years interest-free at Noel Leemings. Now.
The best at the best price, Noel Leemings.
Guaranteed.
God of nations at thy feet, in the bonds of love we meet. Hear our voices we entreat. God defend New Zealand.
The Nissan Maxima is a 6-cylinder car we genuinely believe to be superior. And now, even more so. Because, like the luxurious SE and SEL models, the Maxima 3-litre I now has air conditioning fitted at no extra cost, but only for a limited time. So, if you're quite ready to realize your dream, come share ours.
Welcome back to Referendum 92, the decision. For very latest results, back to Richard Hammond at the Results Centre.
Where the number of votes that have been counted is creeping up. 48% of polling places are in now. 20.4% of those on the roll have had their votes counted. And still a majority for change. 84.7% wanting change, 15.3% wanting to retain the present system. And of the changes that people actually want, when we look down the list, 5.5% wanting the supplementary member system, 17.4% favouring the single transferable vote, 70.5% opting for MMP, and 6.6% for preferential voting. Now, one interesting point that has cropped up here tonight is a prediction on the turnout, and that's all it can be at this stage because there are a large number of special votes and special Maori votes to be counted. But the Chief Electoral Officer, Helen Clark, is saying that he thinks the turnout is high, that it is between possibly as high as 67%, certainly very similar to what we saw in the last referendum. So those predictions, or perhaps even hopes, that there would be a low turnout don't seem to have been carried through. Lindsay.
Thanks, Richard. So it looks as though the mixed member proportional system is emerging as the people's choice, the preferred electoral reform option. Let's then take a quick look at what MMP is all about. Here's Daryl Hutchison.
MMP would give each voter 2 votes. One, much as we have now, a vote for a local electorate MP, and the other a new vote, this one for a party list of candidates. In Parliament, the local MPs would fill just half of the seats, while the party list vote would fill the other half. And it'd fill them so that each party's share of the entire Parliament was in proportion to its party list vote. In a 100-seat Parliament, for example, a minor party that got only 1 electorate seat, but 10% of the party list vote, would get 9 party list seats, 10 in all. A party with less than 4% of the second vote would, however, get no party list seats, as recommended by the Royal Commission.
Well, if MMP is confirmed as the people's choice, it will be over to the government to hear submissions and then define the version of this electoral system that goes forward to a second binding referendum at next year's election. Prime Minister Jim Bolger joins us now from the Beehive. Let's hear it once again, Prime Minister, because there have been some doubts expressed in some quarters. We will have that second referendum, won't we?
Oh, absolutely, Lindsay. We went into this with a promise for 3 stages. One we've just had today, that's the promise to hold a referendum, and we've held that, and it looks like there's a very strong vote for MMP. The second promise was to introduce legislation according to the preferred option, and we will introduce legislation putting MMP into the Parliament. And then the third stage we will deliver on, and I note that we will deliver on, is a vote at the time of the next election between MMP now and the existing status quo.
Do you imagine that the final model will closely resemble the one suggested by the Royal Commission, 60 seats of each type?
Well, that's certainly the one we will start with. The Royal Commission is the only proposition on the table, and I've made this clear right through the lead up to the referendum. We would work from the Royal Commission's model. Now, that will go to Parliament's Select Committee, of course, and those who wish to make submissions to suggest alternatives, alterations, changes will have that opportunity. The Select Committee, of course, represents both sides of Parliament, and they will make what recommendations they then believe appropriate back to the Parliament.
This result tonight is surely a kick in the shins for the 2 major parties, Prime Minister.
Well, you can interpret it as that. I think you can say that a lot of people out there want change. I think they see change in the electoral system as perhaps changing their particular circumstances in New Zealand. It's been a difficult 10 years for New Zealand, no question about that. And countries all around the world are looking for change. We're not the only country looking for change. The irony is some of those who have MMP are thinking of changing the first past the post. But we're not going to deviate. We made a commitment to the electorate. There would be a 3-stage procedure followed, and that procedure will be followed.
So your chickens are coming home to roost, though. That's the nub of it, isn't it? The broken promises are now being flung back at you.
No, I don't think my chickens are coming home to roost. I think what we are seeing is a country a little unhappy, no more than a little unhappy, quite unhappy at having to adjust to a quite different world. It was more comfortable before, and we kept spending money we didn't have, and we still have people promising to spend money we don't have. Mr. Anderton's keen on that. And people are saying, look, we don't like the change, therefore we'll change the electoral system and perhaps the pain will go away. But that should not deflect us from the fact that the commitment was made to have this referendum. We listened to the Royal Commission's recommendations in general, put them before the public. The public have had this chance to speak. They'll have a subsequent chance to make a final decision.
And the question on the upper house, will that be in the referendum next year too?
That'll be in the referendum next year as well, because it's the judgment of some, including myself, that the only effective check you can have on the House of Representatives is a separately elected House of second chamber, which in fact can exercise some considerable control over the House of Representatives. That's been my preferred view for many, many years. The irony is I've been a supporter of electoral reform. It just happens that I prefer the option of a elected second chamber as exercising checks and balances. Others prefer MMP or STV or whatever.
So it would seem. Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us. Well, let's now join a group of people who've been campaigning to persuade New Zealanders to vote for the mixed member proportional system. Michael Wilson is at the MMP Campaign Committee's referendum party on Auckland's North Shore. Michael.
Well, I'm with some very excited MMP fans here. One of the most excited is Dr. Hans Gruber, who's a leading advocate of MMP. Hans, how are you feeling tonight after this result?
I think I have witnessed history here in New Zealand, and I'm very, very happy about how New Zealanders voted, that they didn't fall into the scare trap put out by some of those people we have seen before on this program. And I'm very, very happy with the result, and I'm very happy about MMP coming through as such a clear winner.
Now, how about the nuts and bolts of what MMP is going to be? Bob Harvey, you've been also a leading advocate. What do you actually want to see on the forms when the election comes around?
Well, I want to find out who the people that have been marginalised, the Maori and the poor, and there's a lot of poor in New Zealand right now, how they are going to cope with all this. But this is a momentous day. Not since we gave the vote to women have we had a political change like this, and it is a very historic day. But I want to find out how it's going to work for the people that really matter. I come from Waitakere, and there's a lot of problems out there, and there's much to be done. I want to know how they are going to see this coming right.
Is it a decisive change for New Zealand politics, though, do you think?
It's a decisive change for us. This is the day. And from the rest of we go forward to the next century now with a new system. That's what I wanted.
OK, so from a very excited place in Takapuna, Lindsay.
Thank you, Michael. Early days for reaction yet, but this evening our reporter John Stewart caught up with a few of the people who've been lobbying for and against electoral change in the lead-up to today's referendum.
I think that there is further education yet of the public as to what this all means, but it's an exciting result. I think that the people of New Zealand have responded well.
Year of intense debate ahead?
I would imagine so. I hope that the issue doesn't become politicised. I think that individual politicians within each caucus have supported all of the options. Now the real work begins.
I'm absolutely delighted. I think the people have made the sensible decision.
Do you think there's going to be a lot of education required now, though?
Yes, I think there's going to be a lot of education needed. There's a lot of important debates we still have to work through. How many MPs, what happens to Maori seats. So a lot of things still to go. This is just the first step.
I certainly knew that the level of disillusion would be very, very high, and we've seen that tonight. However, the debate is only just beginning. MMP looks as though it's come through on the coattails of that disillusionment, but let's see what the turnout has been, and let's start the debate next year about the alternatives.
Do you think, though, that a year from now there's still a chance that first past the post could stay?
Oh, I'm very sure. I'm very sure that it will.
OK, let's say you do keep first past the post after the next referendum. Would you be also pushing for an upper house?
I think that's a very, very important option that voters will also have an opportunity to express an opinion on next time, and that's, of course, an important form of parliamentary reform.
It's a great day for democracy in New Zealand. The people have sent a clear message to Parliament. They want more democracy, not less. Our Parliament will have to heed that message, and for Māori in particular, our vote is now going to count more.
Well, I am disappointed, but there's definitely a mood for change. And I think it's going to be a very exciting year, a very interesting year, because I feel that there has to be some really close scrutiny of government, of the Constitution, and the role political parties play.
One final check on results now. Back to Richard at the Results Centre.
55% of the polling places have been counted, 24.7% of the people on the roll. And still a majority for change, 84.7% want change, 15.3% want to retain the present system. Now, we have a prediction on the turnout. It's not actually a calculation, but the prediction is that it's going to be about the same as the last referendum, and that looks sort of 60 plus or minus 5 to 10%. So a pretty solid turnout. Looking at the options. Supplementary member system, 5.5% want that. Single transferable vote, 17.5%. Massive majority for MMP, 70.4%, and 6.6% wanting preferential voting. So there it is from the Results Centre, a big majority for change and a big majority for MMP. Lindsay.
That's exactly what you anticipated, Nigel.
Well, the order is, certainly I didn't predict quite the size of the vote for either change or for MMP. But as we talked earlier, I mean, in some ways it's not surprising. I think, though, what a lot of people have been saying tonight, and the comments from the various proponents that we heard just before we heard Richard Hammond, that, you know, the battle's not lost until it's won. The next referendum is a binding referendum at the time of the next general election. And that, I think, is going to be a very different affair. I think what really motivated this referendum was anger, disillusion, a mood for change. It's a little bit like people who write in or ring up Television New Zealand to complain. They seldom ring up to say, thanks, you did a great job.
You're not wrong.
And I do think that what will happen is at the next general election, next referendum at the next general election, it'll bring many, many more people in who didn't take part in this referendum, and I think they will be heavily weighted in favour of the present system. They'll be quite prepared to vote against MMP next time round.
So, cut and dry tonight, but it's not over yet.
Far from it.
Nigel Roberts, thank you very much. And that's our program, but do stay with us. I'll be back throughout the rest of this evening with further referendum results updates, and a final result is expected around 10 o'clock tonight. And I'll be joined again by Nigel Roberts at 11:35 with a summary of today's historic vote on electoral reform. But for now, good night.
Later, Murder East, Murder West is our film club.